Oh, right. So this is going to quickly cover my video presentation for the Scales of Fate. The Scales of Fate is going to be a game mechanic, and it's going to be demonstrated inside of a very small video game demo. It's only going to be about 5 to 10 minutes in length for the demo. And the main point of the Scales of Fate is that it's going to be built with Unreal Engine 5. The mechanic will be predominantly around changing the likelihood of a object doing something. So, how likely an object is going to be triggering a certain type of event every time the trigger criteria for that is met. And the game, in order to show off this mechanic, will have an AI that moves around inside of the environment, causing other various things to trigger or occur as part of the game mechanic. And the way that the mechanic itself is implemented is through a percentage basis. How likely percent-wise is something to occur every time a trigger event for it would happen. So how likely is light going to flicker when somebody steps on a certain spot in the room, or when the AI passes through a certain point in the room? And obviously implementing it so that this is a player mechanic, not just like a game design mechanic, is having a user interface that is very approachable. So a lot of that's going to have to deal with how is the percentile going to be represented, how are players going to change the percentile on something, how is the influence of changing it going to affect any kind of visual representation, and then the other mechanic would be having a variety of events, having some that interact, others that are completely standalone, and some that are completely isolated. So having a variety of these demonstrations for changing the probability or the likelihood that something can occur. So not having I click, it does this direct interface with the game anymore, but having of I've made this more likely to happen, or I've made that less likely to happen, and having the players interact with an environment where they can change the likelihood of something occurring as an upfront game mechanic. So, as a demonstration for the concept of it, you change the percentage of how the lights flicker, or how often they flicker. So you change the percentage up here, and as a result, if the lights flicker when the AI moves into a certain position, the AI looks at it. But as some of us do, myself occasionally even, while they're looking at something, they're still moving, so they trip on the rug. So while they trip on the rug and they do that whole stumble to catch yourself thing, they miss the fact that they're tripping on. They miss the fact that they're tripping, or that a nearby picture frame, which could be another event from a percentage, falls. And if they don't notice it falling, it can fall on them. So that can have consequences. You could do it so that it's absolutely certain that the light flickers, but it's not impossible for the picture frame to fall, but it's 100% possible for them to trip on the rug. So anytime they basically walk up to the rug, they trip on it, and them looking at the flickering lights would increase the chance. So the way the objects in the scene would interact with one another would also change the likely occurrence, but it's not going to just be, I clicked on this, it'll fall when he moves under it. This is a more nuisance system of it. And though it's not clearly demonstrated here, there'll be the counterpulling hand of fate. So when you adjust the percentages on something somewhere else in the scene, the counter hand of fate will adjust other percentages. So you might be, for like say a game, specifically going at the possibility of X event occurring every so often. Well, then the counter hands of fate will look at how much you've influenced the percentage of event X or item X, and then go over to Y and change how likely events occur on Y. And there could be multiple different occurrences on something. So like for an electric chandelier, you could have a chance of falling. You could have a chance of light flickering. You could have a chance of the bulbs just flat out burning out. So you could have everything from a very peaceful house that's full of seemingly klutzy people to what's effectively like a haunted manor. And it could all be covered within the same game using the same system. Which, okay, if I'm going to be very frank about it, the game mechanic itself most readily and immediately lends itself to a kind of poltergeist haunting adversary system. So your adversary would be a poltergeist, and they would change the events or the probabilities on it. And depending on how they did it, they could make the house look entirely possessed or haunted. And you throw that in with a couple other game mechanics for an adversary system, and you can make a really immersive and suspenseful game because having a human brain controlling the occurrence of events produces a lot more random, varied, nuanced, and targeted results than any AI could just sit down and paper code out because the complexity and interactions between two humans is always going to exceed the complexity of interactions between humans and an AI from just the recreational standpoint. So, this has been a presentation on the Scales of Fate. Thank you for your time.